DeathsTalker here. So it's Sunday afternoon and the latest MotoGP race is done. That is the Grand Prix of the Czech Republic. And what a very interesting weekend, and more importantly, what a very, very interesting and thrilling race. So we'll start off with the big news. As you know, Marc Marquez, who had broken his arm, was actually scheduled to ride at this race, and on the Monday it was announced he was getting surgery on his arm to get the plate replaced. Apparently it broke, and the doctor apparently had never seen that happen with that plate before, without like having another sort of a crash or a sharp injury. So they were kind of surprised. I sort of thinking that maybe the doctor wasn't aware of the amount of physical stress that a MotoGP rider gets on their body, because they replaced it with a thicker titanium plate. And he was then out for the next 3 races, so he probably will not be back until Misano, which is the Italian Grand Prix. So he's going to miss, he missed of course the Czech Republic, and he's going to miss the 2 races at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. So that sort of like took everyone by surprise. Even more interesting was the fact that the way he broke the plate was opening a sliding glass door in his house, and so obviously the plate had been weakened and it just snapped. So that took him out. So that's sort of like everyone was looking for Fabio, because he's won the last 2 races, to continue on with his way, and we'll get to Fabio in a minute. But on the Friday practice, Pecco Bagnaia, who raced through Ducati, had a massive crash in Friday practice and broke his knee. So he is now the 4th MotoGP rider who is out. And on Saturday he had the surgery. Apparently there was no ligament damage, and he is scheduled to be back for Misano, and he's being replaced by Mika Kallio, the Ducati test rider. So that's the way we start the weekend, race weekend with. Now there was a big controversy about the Czech Republic, is that the track itself has not been resurfaced for 12 years, which for a Grand Prix track like a Formula 1 or MotoGP track, that's actually pretty bad. You think asphalt, it doesn't really wear out that fast, but on a racetrack it tends to wear out, and the racing line, basically where everyone is riding, tends to get polished, and the riders were extremely upset about the lack of grip. They said it was almost like riding on ice. And you know, so that apparently is going to be brought up at the safety meeting, and whether or not something gets done about it for next season or whatever, we don't know. So for qualifying, it looked like the Ducatis were having some serious problem, except for Johan Zarco, who's riding last year's Ducati. For some reason he actually got his bike to hook up pretty well, so he was actually running pretty good in practice. Everybody else, Jack Miller, Dovi, Danilo, they were all like seriously at the back of the grid. It was actually pretty bad. So and of course the Hondas, with Stefan Bradl stepping in for Marc, and Kyle Crutchlow being injured, and Alex Marquez being a rookie, the Honda guys were all quite a ways towards the back. So it was again not looking all that good for those guys. But surprisingly, the Yamahas were having a problem. Fabio was complaining the whole weekend about the lack of grip, and his bike was bucking and sliding all over the place, and it wasn't looking good for him. Maverick Vinales, although he was fast, he also seemed to be running the same problem. Valentino Rossi was looking at it a different way. He apparently had the engineers have a bike set up the way the engineers want it, and Rossi had a bike set up the way he liked it. And what happened was the bike that he liked is what he raced last 2 weeks ago in Jerez, and that got him third on the race. So obviously his setup is working better. So it's looking more like the Yamaha engineers are starting to, you know, listen to Rossi. So he was looking better than most. Now, surprising, Paul Espargo, who races for KTM, was really fast. In fact, so was his brother Alex. And the interesting thing was, is Alace. Anyways, for qualifying, Alace hooked on the back of Fabio, and Fabio, of course, set the fastest lap, and Alace used him as a sort of like a cross between a tow and a guide, and he had second on the grid. So he was looking at a front row start, and so it was quite interesting. Now, Fabio at the time had the pole, and he figured he was going to be all set, so he was actually cruising around, and I guess he wasn't paying attention because Johan Zarco came through and took the pole. And it was interesting because Franco Morbidelli, who's the teammate of Fabio, was also in the front row. So you actually had technically a year-old Ducati on the front row and two Petronas Yamahas. So it was quite an interesting starting grid. So on warm-up for the Sunday race, Paul Espargo they were actually starting to talk about him possibly winning the race, because apparently he was running way faster than at race pace than everyone else. KTM has built a new bike for this year, and if you're the engineering type, the KTM people, they use round steel tubing to make their chassis, and this year they made some changes to oval tubing for some locations to introduce flex in the bike chassis, which actually improves the handling, and it seems to be working. At this particular track, the KTMs were all going really well. Like they were fast, they were turning into the corners, they were able to carry way more speed, so it looked like it was going to be quite the race. So the race started, Zarco was on the pole, didn't get a great start, he got swallowed up by everybody, and Fabio, tried to make a run for the front, but didn't quite make it, and Franco Morbidelli got in front and took off. And very quickly, Paul Espargo was basically hunting down Fabio, and he was like right on his tail. But then Brad Binder, who was his teammate, who really hadn't done too well this year, first race he crashed out of pretty violently, and the second race he took out a fellow KTM rider from one of the other teams, and ended up finishing at the back of the pack at the end of the race. But he had good times, but basically he's had 2 Moto Grand Prix races and he's had 2 horrible events. So his plan this particular race was to just basically not visit the gravel trap and finish. So that was his plan, but his bike was working really well, and he was cutting his way up through the pack. Eventually caught up to Pole, who was trying to get himself set up to go after Fabio, and then he sort of bumped Pole out of the way and started chasing down Fabio. Now Pole was trying to get back, but he ran wide and got swallowed up by a bunch of people, so he had to work his way back up. And Brad was just following Fabio around. Now this is where you can see the Yamahas were having problems with grip, because Fabio just could not keep the same pace as Franco. And surprisingly, Zarco was starting to make his way up, and him and Pole were dicing, and they came into the one corner, and Pole went a little bit wide, and Zarco sort of dove in to take the spot, but then Pole was coming back in, and what happened was they sort of bumped together, and Pole went down. And Pole was, to say livid is an understatement. His pace he was at, he was probably going to win the race. That's how fast he was going. Just checking. This is a construction crossing zone. You want to make sure I don't get run over by a giant tractor or bulldozer. It's a quarry down there. So anyways, Zarco, you know, eventually was starting to catch up to Fabio and Brad as well, but then Brad noticed that Fabio just wasn't fast enough, and Brad was more than fast enough, and eventually he passed Fabio. As soon as he passed him, he left him like, you know, like Fabio was down 30 horsepower, and he took off after Franco Morbidelli, and he's just, you know, driving the wheels off his bike, not really putting the foot wrong, and was running down Franco. And Franco, of course, was starting to run into tire problems as well. And very quickly he caught Franco, and then passed him, and again left him within a lap. He had over a second lead, and I think he was running like around a 3-second lead by the end. Like, he just basically ran away from it. He was untouchable. Zarco was chasing up to just trying to figure what's going on here. Okay. Franco was chasing up to Fabio, and Fabio was actually even in a worse situation than Franco. His tires were shot. He had zero grip, and you could actually see it. The bike was sort of shaking and twitching everywhere. If you got on the gas, it was like almost trying to go sideways. And I think he was more of a case of just trying to finish. So Zarco ended up passing Fabio, and then a couple minutes later he got a penalty for knocking Pole off. There's a lot of debate. Like, to me, it was a racing incident, but it was one that shouldn't have happened in the first place, because Zarco shouldn't have did what he did. But he ended up getting a penalty for the long lap penalty loop, and did a stunning job. Like, if MotoG uploads a video of him taking the penalty loop, dragging his knee all the way through it, you just got to watch it. It's absolutely spectacular, because that part of the track is very dirty and slippery, and Zarco mentioned that it's all the experience from riding motorcycles on the roads in France. So apparently he rides street bikes when he's not racing, so it was pretty impressive. So anyways, he took his penalty, and he figured he was going to have 2 or 3 riders at least pass him to take his spot, and nobody did. Fabio was the only one close to him, and he when he got out of the loop, Fabio was behind him, but again within like about 3 corners, Fabio was like way behind. And Fabio ended up getting swallowed up by Alex Rins and also Valentino Rossi. So it was quite the surprise to see the guy who won the last 2 races, you know, ending up so far behind. The only person that was probably in a worse situation was Maverick Vinales. He finished way down the order. He started, I think he was qualified about 10th or something. I'll put it up here if I can remember to do it. And he finished way down the list. The Ducatis, they started quite a ways down, and they didn't really go anywhere either. So the race ended up finishing with Brad Binder winning his first ever MotoGP race after only 3 starts. And that was the first ever MotoGP race win for KTM, which was, you know, that's a historic moment. So that was quite the thing. So Binder has been a member of the Red Bull KTM team since the Rookies Cup and Moto3 and Moto2. So it's you know, it's quite a little bit of history there. So everyone was super thrilled about it, and you know, couldn't have a nicer guy. It's and he's a great rider. Second place was Franco Morbidelli. That was his first ever MotoGP podium. He was hoping for the win, but he was quite happy with second place because this time he was actually on the podium. The last race at Jerez, he had his motor fail on his Yamaha, so he had to pull off when he had a definite podium then. So this was actually a bonus for him. And third place was Zarco, which is his first ever podium with Ducati. And that's after a year of racing for the factory KTM team and just crashing out almost every race. So he was quite happy and animated about that. So that was the MotoGP race. Very exciting, very interesting, great people winning, involving. For the Americans, Joe Roberts got a podium for the Moto2 race. That's his first podium ever in the Grand Prix. And it's 22 years since the last American, which was John Kaczynski, had been on the podium in a what was back then a 250 Grand Prix race. So that was quite the weekend. I really enjoyed it. Even though the Hondas didn't do well, racing is racing. So anyways, this weekend coming up, we're off to the Red Bull Ring for 2 weeks back to back. And we'll see if the Ducatis can recover on their track they've never lost on. DeathsStalker, signing off.